Of all the narratives that come out of the pro-Russia crowd, the one that I find the most disingenuous, the one I find the lamest, is the whole Russia was a good boy, he didn't do nothing. We need more money for the Belt and Road Initiative. Narrative that Russia's just a victim. Russia's never invaded another country. They've never colonized another country. They've never flooded conquered lands with Russian peasants in order to change the demographic balance, and then later use those same Russian settlers as a pretext to reinvade countries that leave it. That's never happened. Russia's never been like a white Christian country. It's always been this like third world. It's been an African country in Eurasia. Russia's never carried out regime change against anyone, either in its sphere of influence or in other parts of the world. It's never encroached on anyone else's sphere of influence. The only people who've ever done that is the United States. And I think the problem is, and the reason why this works so well, is because the United States is run by crazy people who have no conception of optics or geopolitical realism, and they make it extremely easy for Russia to sell this narrative to the third world. And I've covered this a number of times where America will go to third world countries and they'll say, look, you have to do exactly what we do. We're not going to give you anything, or else we're going to blockade you or destroy your economy or do something else. Whereas Russia and China, even if they think these people are their inferiors, they'll go to them, they'll be polite, they'll treat them as an equal, they'll try to make deals with them. And so it's very easy for Russia to go to the third world and to portray themselves as a victim and to say, look, we're one of you. We've never done any of this. We weren't a colonial power at any point in our history. We were just a good boy. We didn't do nothing. And that extends to like the whole Russia is a country of peace. Putin is a man of peace. He's a man of honor. Russia never violated any treaty. All the treaties that they complain that the West violated or didn't sign, Russia would have abided by those. Russia would have 100% respected Ukrainian neutrality. They never would have tried to force them into the Eurasian Union. They never would have tried to take parts of the country or make them into a client state. They would have respected that. They wouldn't have tried. They wanted to lease Crimea. Okay, guys. They wanted to lease Crimea. They never were going to annex Crimea. They weren't going to annex the Donbass republics. They wanted them to be an autonomous part of Ukraine, or maybe independent, or maybe part of Russia, depending on what week it is. Like the special military operation was never about seizing land from Ukraine. It was about self defense. It was about a poor, suffering country invading an aggressive foreign power. And it's like, let's just be real here. Russia is a great power, perhaps a superpower even. And superpowers or great powers have certain privileges that you and I may not like, but that's just the way that international politics works, and international politics has always worked. Great powers almost invariably absorb the countries around them. The smaller countries around them, either in the form of direct annexation or making them into satellite or buffer states. I mean, France did this with all the duchies that were semi autonomous. Spain is a whole bunch of different kingdoms that were melded together. Germany's an obvious case, so is the United Kingdom. India is a whole bunch of unconnected princely states that were forced together into a federation that had no real historical basis. This is just something literally every great power does. And Russia wanting the surrounding countries that have historically either been part of it or under its influence to be part of it or under its influence is just a very typical great power motivation. Russia feels that because it lost so much of its power, its economic economy, its population with the collapse of the Soviet Union, it's lost its superpower status. It's now substantially weaker than China or the United States. And the easiest way to do that is to reestablish control over a lot of the regions that it lost. And as I said, to a certain extent, that is its right as a great power. And a lot of the regions that broke off of Russia are failed states. They have the borders make no sense because they were based on administrative borders. They weren't based on ethnic or religious or linguistical borders. They're largely arbitrary. There's like The governments in these countries are just not functional in any meaningful sense. They're corrupt. A lot of them have had basically no development since the end of the Soviet Union. And they're basically dependent upon Russia anyways. And it's just like, I guess Russia's just like, you know what, they can just join us at this point in time. Be it this Eurasian Union or this Union state or something like that. So my point is, I think Russia does have a good argument from a historical standpoint that these lands are in their sphere of influence or should be directly part of Russia, or at least the Russian majority areas in these countries should be. My issue though is the whole like narrative that Russia is this altruistic country that is just trying to help these other guys out. They don't have any designs on annexing Georgia or annexing Ukraine or annexing Belarus. They support democracy. They support freedom and democracy and sovereignty and independence. And that's just what they're trying to impose on these countries. They're just trying to help them out. They're like neocons, but actual neocons. They actually believed in freedom and democracy. I mean, let's just be real here. That's clearly not their motivation. Their motivation is to rebuild the Russian Empire, to rebuild the Soviet Union, as it were, to bring the countries that were historically under Russian influence back under Russian influence, and to rebuild themselves into being a superpower again. That's the motivation. It's not like some big altruistic Russia's like we are the world, free the whales, save the children type of thing. And even if we go back to like, let's look at just some of the justifications that we've gotten over the years, shall we? We have the whole like, oh, the Georgian government or the Ukrainian government is ethnically cleansing people. And then you're like, well, they're attacking regions that are attempting to secede from their countries to join their major geopolitical rival. It gets a little more complicated. I mean, did Russia just let Chechnya leave, or did Russia fight an extremely brutal war to prevent them from separating? I mean, they did. I mean, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, would Russia allow, like, if Yakutsk or some of these other Central Asian parts of it wanted to leave, would they allow that to happen now, or would they violently suppress it? And the answer is obviously they probably would try to violently suppress it. They've lost all the territory they're willing to lose. So, like, we can talk about, oh, the Ukrainians were shelling the Donbass region, Ukrainians were attacking it. At the end of the day, and you can consider Ukraine to be a legitimate or illegitimate state or a failed state or whatever your position is, it was a part of the country that they viewed as part of the country that was attempting to secede. And that was a fairly normal reaction to try to reinvade it and reconquer it. And so how it kind of went in a lot of these cases is it's like, okay, well, we're going to declare independence, and the central government's like, no. And then Russia's like, have you seen this? Have you seen that they're trying to prevent the secessionist movements? This is horrible. This is the United States. Like, and this is how it all goes. And we go back to Euromaidan, obviously, where Ukraine was going to join the EU, and then what's his name, Lukashenko, whatever his name, came to power, and then he said, "We're not going to join the EU. We're going to join Russia now." And then there was an EU-backed coup that overthrew him and put a pro-American government back in power. And this was supposed to be like overriding the will of the Ukrainian people. It's like, let's be honest, Ukraine's a failed state. It's been a failed state since the Soviet Union. It's an incredibly corrupt country that lacks an effective central government, whose economy has not grown significantly since the end of the Soviet Union, that has huge ethno-cultural problems, the lack of a solid Ukrainian identity, a very large Russian minority that is loyal to Russia. Ukraine has a lot of problems. It's always kind of been a disaster ever since the end of the Soviet Union. And like, let's not pretend that Lukashenko, whatever, was some paragon of democratic virtue. That he was this uncorrupt, like nice guy who was gonna hadn't he wasn't going against the will of the Ukrainian people at all. And I mean, this is when we get into this whole issue of self determination and will of the people and stuff like that. Reality, once again, is it's only the will of the people when it's your side. It's Ukraine can talk about democracy. I bet you any amount of money, if you had have held a referendum in Crimea under whatever conditions you want to come up with, they would have voted to join Russia. And even if they had election observers who ensured that not a single ballot was incorrectly marked, Ukraine would not accept the decision of Crimea to secede and join Russia. It also gets into the whole like tyranny of the majority thing. Like if 51% of Ukraine wants to say F you to Russia and join the EU, like what about the other 49%? Like the concept of popular sovereignty, well, it's good in some levels, and I get it. At the same time, anyone can really use it for any reason. And the like, you have colored revolutions, but does anyone remember the Cold War when the Soviet Union carried out red revolutions of their own all over the world? It's not like America is the only one doing this. America is just the only one really doing this now. And they do it in such a flagrant, retarded, obvious way that it just looks really bad. I mean, that's kind of I think the biggest issue that the U.S. really has, other than having being led by crazy people who don't know how to do basic diplomacy, who don't care about optics or whatever, is they're just not very good at doing stuff like this. Like they can get results, but it's really, really obvious that it's not spontaneous, it's not grassroots, it's the National Endowment of Democracy or the CIA or whoever goes in and stirs the pot and gets these governments overthrown. But my point is, I think the entire argument about the will of the Ukrainian people is just kind of bullshit. Because, like I said, it's a failed state. Its borders are based upon Soviet administrative borders. It's not based along ethnocultural boundaries. Once again, Crimea was part of Russia until Khrushchev moved it during what was it, the 1960s or 1970s or whatever. And that's pretty much the entirety of the justification for it being part of an independent Ukraine. Transnistria wants to be part of Russia, but regardless of what the popular will is, it's just not going to happen. So, like, I just don't know if the whole argument about popular will even really matters within the context of Ukraine. Because at the end of the day, a substantial portion of the population is either Russian or pro Russian and wants to be part of the Russian Federation or in the orbit of the Russian Federation. And a substantial portion of the country does not want that and wants to be part of Europe. And it's just, I just don't think it's really reconcilable with any broad concept of popular sovereignty. You probably are going to eventually have to break the country up. I mean, that's basically what Russia's doing at the moment. But, like, it's the whole thing, though, is like Russia was forced into doing this because the Ukrainians were attacking the part of the country that was trying to secede. And Russia recognized their independence, and Ukraine's like, no, it's part of Ukraine. And Russia's like, we're gonna call it a special military operation. It's not an invasion, it's not a conquest, it's not a war. It's a special military operation. Special like Special K the cereal. It's like just call it a war, call it an invasion. Like people endlessly mock the U.S. for calling Vietnam a police action or whatever term they come up with for their wars. But special military operation is just so lame, and you get people who take it seriously and they're like, it's not a war, it's the special military operation. Or what are the goals of the special military operation? To demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. It's like Ukraine's not a neo-Nazi state. There's some like retarded neo-Nazi larpers who serve as some elite units in the army. But like, are we actually going to say that like Zelensky is a doctrinal national socialist? Like, let's just be real here. Let's just stop with the nonsense. Let's stop with the stuff that's fake and G-slur. We can look at any of the agreements that Russia tried to make with the West about how Ukraine was going to be neutral and it was going to be demilitarized. The reality is, I don't believe for a second Russia wouldn't have immediately tried to bring Ukraine into its direct sphere of influence. Either have it join the Eurasian Union or the Union state with Belarus, or even just try to fund pro Russian parties and try to install a pro Russian government. That's what Russia would have done. It would have been in Russia's self interest to do so. And Russia wants to retake Ukraine and Georgia and all these other places that were part of the Soviet Union so it can become a great power again. I don't really see what's the big deal with admitting to that. With admitting that Russia is an imperial power and it wants its empire back. And every great power wants that. China wanted Tibet back, it wanted Taiwan back, France wanted Alsace back, Germany wanted the Republic of German Austria back. Look that one up. It's pretty normal for countries to want to kind of restore themselves after a collapse to their pre-collapse borders. So if you support Russia because Russia is objectively a more conservative country, that the EU has all for a large part it's just forced mass immigration, global homo. It's destroying the culture, religion, and genetic makeup of its various member states. That it promotes all kinds of evil throughout the world. That America has destabilized entire regions with retarded neocon foreign policy, and that you think Russia is the less bad option, and you think that ultimately a lot of these countries would be better off in Russia's sphere of influence than in the American or European sphere of influence, and you think Russia, for all of its faults, is a better option than the EU, or you like them more than the EU, that's fine. If you want to support Russian imperialism, that's fine. Let's just not play this game of believing everything Putin says when he's obviously just playing for optics. Let's not go with this whole Russia was a good boy, Russia didn't do nothing. We need more money from BRICS. We need more money for the Belt and Road Initiative. Russia is a third world country. Russia never invaded any of these various places in Siberia and Central Asia and subjugated them and then flooded them with Russian peasants. That's just what imperial powers do. It doesn't make Russia, I guess, kind of any more or less evil than any other great power in history. And I just think you need to contextualize it. You have to think in Russia as a context of a great power that's playing great power politics and just has the immense benefit of their opponents being complete mongoloids, pun intended. Their opponents being complete mongoloids and just being completely incapable of dealing with any other human beings in a way that shows any kind of respect or courtesy or anything like that. So that's my thoughts on it. You know my opinion on this whole issue and what side I tend to take. But I just try to be real with you guys, and let's just be real here. What this war is about, what Russia wants. Let's stop with the pretense.